Hello, and a big warm welcome to the Guardian Doulas Diary podcast. My name is Angela Deuce, and I'm your host and the founder of Guardian Doula. I am a certified birth and postpartum doula and childbirth educator based on Sydney's Northern Beaches and serving women and families all throughout Sydney. This podcast is an honest collection of the stories and experiences of birthing women and the professionals that support them to empower, equip, and inspire us all. Let's get into it. So this week we are supposed to have heard a birth story, but I had some glitches on the recording of the one that I planned. So instead we'll have a birth story next week, and a professional who supports birthing women will be on this week. So this episode I chat to Lexie Benicky. Lexie is a friend of mine. I know her outside of the podcast, which is lovely, but she's also a midwife living and working in Sydney. We talk about the importance of following your intuition, surrendering to the process of pregnancy, birth, and motherhood. And she tells us about some of her good and not so good experiences working with other doulas, some of the highs and lows of her midwifery career, and also some of her stories of the most bizarre things that she's seen and experienced as a midwife. Lexie is a midwife who truly loves and respects the process of birth, and she's also a lovely person. So I think you'll really enjoy this episode. Without further ado, here's our conversation. Thank you so much for coming on here today. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
So I'm Lexie. I am a mum to a 6-month-old little rocket called Arthur. I'm married to my husband, Luke. We've been together for 8 years. And professionally, I am a midwife and a nurse. I always when I was younger, wanted to look after people. And so I kind of fell into nursing, worked as a nurse for a couple of years until I realized that as a nurse, you're only ever seeing people on one of the worst days of their life. So I was like, how can I turn this around and look after people on a good day? So I looked into midwifery, and in 2020, I became the midwife. And I haven't looked back. I absolutely love it. So absolutely excited to be on this podcast today and talk all things being a mum, being a midwife, and all things in between.
That is so beautiful. I love what you said about having been a nurse, you're seeing people on the worst days of their life. And then when you are working in midwifery, you're seeing them on one of the most exciting days of their life. And it's so amazing that you have that perspective, because sometimes I feel like when I'm with mums or whatever and they're in labor and they're having their babies, sometimes it can feel a little bit like the midwife's just a bit, get on with it. I don't know, it's like another day in the office for them. And I think sometimes it can be really easy for it to feel like, yeah, it's just not that special. It's just another day at work. So it's so cool that you have that perspective of no, this is one of the best days of their life. This is a really, really crucial, significant moment for them.
Oh, totally. I think as a midwife, we have the honor and the curse of being with people on 99% of the time, an incredible day. And then that 1% of it being either a horrible day or something going wrong, or if they're going to have a baby who's born too early or not going to come home. And you get to be with women in all of the in-between, which is pretty incredible.
Yeah, that's amazing. Such important and such special work that you do. I feel so honored too. I feel really similarly to what you just said, just being there through all of it, whether it's good, whether it's bad, whether it's hard, whether it feels whatever, just being there for women and for their families at that time is so special and it really is an honor. It's such a vulnerable time for them. There's a lot of unknown, and it's just really beautiful to get to be a part of that for someone.
Oh, it really is. I don't think I appreciated it until I had Arthur myself and kind of experienced birth. Did I realize how significant and life-changing it is? So
it's so true. Yeah, so true. Being the one in the vulnerable situation where you're depending on how this goes, it's actually going to impact my life. You realize it's a real person. It's a real mum. It's not just, makes it more real.
Exactly.
tell me about some of your biggest values and beliefs as a midwife.
So as a midwife, I work in a hospital system and I work in the core team, which means I don't work in a continuity of care model. So for me, one of the most important things when I'm caring for women is for them to feel honoured and respected. And so they walk in, like into the birth suite, for example, or I'm caring for them on the maternity ward or in the antenatal clinic. And my goal is to understand who they are as a person kind of as quick as possible without taking away from their experience of labour or their postnatal experience with their new baby, or even if they're having a complication in pregnancy and they're admitted to the ward, like building that experience up and just making sure that they feel seen and heard and loved and like respected. So I guess my kind of value is people feeling valued, that I want to kind of portray to them when I'm caring for them. In the birth space, I just want people to have the birth that they want, and to feel honoured and respected in their birth choices. When you're working in the system and someone just comes in, hands you a birth plan and says, this is what I want, I'm here for my induction, and their birth plan, the first thing it says is, I don't want to be induced. And you're like, okay, let's have a chat before you get things going. And so I think it's a big value to just of mine to ensure that people feel seen and heard and understood. I think when it comes to birth, and like my belief in birth is that a baby's birth is transformative for the mother and the father, but it is the experience that the parents need in order to be parents to this child. So it might be like a really fast birth and they just completely have to surrender and go with it, or like a longer birth that takes a bit of time and that you just have to surrender to it. And as a midwife, just being there to help guide people, I think, is my goal.
Yeah, that's so beautiful. That's so beautiful. So important too, like what you were touching on of just making them feel really comfortable and respected. Like that would be so hard, and obviously it's super important given that a woman in labor like needs to feel super safe and super comfortable and super respected in order for that oxytocin to be flowing. And
exactly.
having like, yeah, I mean, you're not, as you said, you're not working in a continuity of care model yourself at the moment. So that's really hard because you've got to build rapport in such a short space of time, and sometimes in a really intense time as well. If like you said, if something's gone wrong, or if they have come in for an induction that they really didn't want, or whatever it might be.
Yeah, certainly. It's like, I think you need the midwives in continuity of care 1,000%, but I think you need the midwives in the core system as well who value the individual. And I honestly think where I work, I can't really think of many midwives who don't value the person in front of us as an individual.
Yeah, that's so cool. That's so cool. And even what you were saying as well about like respecting their choices. And it's, yeah, I know when this just popped into my head when I had number 4, little Rin, I had declined the antibiotics for group B strep. And every time one of the midwives came in, or I would have to tell someone that I declined the antibiotics, I was like, oh my gosh, I'm so naughty. Like they probably think that I'm so, whatever. Like you have this narrative in your head of like, oh, I'm kind of in trouble here. Like I've said no to something.
Yeah, it's like,
and
it often feels like if you say no to something within the system, or like kind of the birth, like the conveyor belt of hospitalized and medicalized labor, it feels like you're in trouble, and you'll get asked 1,000 times, like, oh, just confirming you're declining this. You understand what this means. And it's really well intended behind it. But then as a consumer, you're like, I know what I said no to.
Yeah, 100%. You feel like you're in
You've
trouble,
got to
even
back
though,
'em
of
up.
course, they're not trying to make you feel like you're in trouble. They're just confirming, and, you know, from a legal perspective, I'm sure it's important that they do that, and that's totally, totally fair. But you do feel like you're like, "Oh my gosh, I'm in trouble, like, I can't
It's
believe
like,
I've said no," even though you've researched it and you're like, "Yep, like, I feel good about this decision." In the moment, the second you feel like the tiniest little bit of judgment, you're like, "Oh my gosh, this is so
yeah,
uncomfortable." So it's just so cool that you touched on before as well about just, you know, respecting their choices and stuff. I'm sure they feel that. Like, when it was a midwife that was doing what you just spoke about, I felt the difference in myself and, like,
mhm.
yeah,
You
yeah,
can
it's
relax.
just
You can let
crazy.
that oxytocin flow. You can allow your body to just like surrender to labor, because if you're fighting someone, then you're in labor, you're fighting labor, in my opinion at least. And I feel like you're not able to fully relax into labor and get into that neocortex and just fully zone out to the world if you're fighting something or if you're afraid of someone else's judgment.
Yeah, it's so true. It reminds
Mm.
me of this, story. Have you read Ina May's Guide to Childbirth
I
at
really
Midwife?
need to. I haven't yet though.
You would love it. There's a story in there about this where the long and the short of it is that this woman's in labor. She's something crazy, like she was checked and she was, I don't know, 8, 9 centimeters well into labor. And her mother-in-law walked into the room kind of uninvited, out of the blue, and this woman didn't have a great relationship with her mother-in-law. So, I mean, even if you do have a great relationship with someone and they just walk in when you're in the middle of giving birth, like, I feel like that's quite, you know, you'd be a little bit thrown by that.
Oh,
And she talks
100%.
about how her dilation, like, essentially went backwards. Like,
Mhm.
when she was checked again later, she was only, I don't know, 2 or 3 or whatever it was, purely because she felt threatened and unsafe. Like, it's just so primal.
Oh,
Yeah.
birth is the most primal thing you can do. In my
Mm.
preparation for my birth with Arthur, I literally went a bit hard and I would only watch animal birthing videos, and I would it was just like my
Wow.
vibe in my mind was go primal. I think because I trusted birth, and you watch animals birth and they trust birth, so why not surround yourself with that kind of energy? If you can, like, if a cow can do it, so can I.
Oh my goodness, that is such a cool strategy. Because 'cause you're right, like, they just do it. They don't second guess
Just do it.
themselves. They don't.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Like, there's not
it's
that
so
much
true.
difference between us and animals when it comes to birthing.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's so true, and I think too, like, when we are surrounded by a lot of medical things, you know, and there is such a important place for those things in some cases where things do go wrong, and it's an absolute blessing that we have access to that kind of healthcare. But then on the flip side of that, I feel like women are a little bit less tuned into their instincts, and they're a little bit less tuned into, like, okay, what do I feel is going on with my body? And
Mm.
even things like before you even conceive, like talking about preconception, like, a lot of women can't tell when they're ovulating. And I find that so
Yeah.
interesting that it's so common that you can't tell, like, where you're at in your cycle, because we just don't tune into our bodies, and we really sort of quieten down our that voice or that intuition.
Yeah, totally. On Midwife's Cauldron, they actually had someone on recently who was literally talking about exactly this, which was like quite fascinating.
Yeah, it's crazy. I think it's really important to be able to like, yeah, tune in and follow your instincts, because it doesn't stop. Like, after the babies come, you have to kind of follow your instincts with everything else after that. It's like, oh, are
Well,
they
like,
sick? Are they this? Are they that? Like, it's all instinct.
well, it's like handing over your intuition. Like, if you think about it from, this is my spiel, but from
Yeah.
like as a woman, you kind of have to surrender your entire life. You surrender to getting your period, going through puberty. Um, if you choose to take contraception, if you don't choose to take contraception, you have to surrender to pregnancy if it comes, pregnancy loss if it comes. then the entire, however long you have symptoms of pregnancy. Like I'm someone who, as soon as I'm pregnant, I vomit until I give birth. That's a big surrender, but you have to surrender to all of it. You have to surrender to the discomfort, to the change in your body image, and then you have to surrender to birth, whichever way that goes. To if you have an unmedicated vaginal birth, if you give birth at home with a midwife, without a midwife, in the hospital with an obstetrician, if you have a cesarean, if you have an instrumental birth, if you have complications, you have to surrender to it all. And then you have a baby and you have to surrender to how you choose to feed the baby. And then the baby's asleep, and the rest of your life you're surrendering to your child, and you look up at your mom and you're like, wow, you did it.
Yeah, it is. It's all just one big surrender. You're so right. And pretty much all of it you can't control. Like you can't control if you're going to be morning sick the whole pregnancy. You can't control whether or not the labor will take a long time or if it will be quick. You can't control if your baby's going to just have a knack for feeding straight away and have a great latch, or whether it takes a little bit of time and practice, or whatever it may be. So much is outside of our control. And I think that's why what you were talking about before is so important. Like, so much of it is out of the control of a woman. We can control where we give birth and who's with us supporting us, whether it's a doula or a midwife or a whoever, whatever, wherever. Like, there are some little things that we can control. And yeah, just kind of, I think, highlights the importance of doing those things well, because so much of the rest of it is just surrendering, which is really beautiful. Like, that's a really beautiful thing.
Oh, I think when you look at surrender as like the act of laying down and like allowing everything to flow, it's actually the most divine thing possible, I think, at least. And that's where that's where joy flourishes. That's where all the beautiful things in life often occur, is in the surrender.
Yes, I completely agree. Yeah, when you're trying to hold on to everything with such a tight fist and you're trying to control everything and make things happen a certain way, you miss so much joy.
Yes, exactly. Totally.
Yeah. I would love to hear what your favorite thing and your least favorite thing is about being a midwife.
Okay, my favorite thing is when someone comes in, they're prepared, but in a way where they're just ready to like go where birth takes them. They're in their zone. They've done some education. They know what they're in for. They're they're not scared of what's coming, and they're excited. And then they have like labor progresses. They have a beautiful birth, and then you just see like the parents holding their baby, and you just think like this is the best thing in the world. And then like you feel their oxytocin high, and so everything's gone beautifully. You just walk out of the room and you're like, this is why I do it. This is the best thing ever. I absolutely love this. Like, as if midwifery is really a job, and I get to be with this woman and her family as they become a family or expand their family. And so I think that's really the best part for me. And like, when everything is just like, when you can feel the family's stoke, and like when their oxytocin is just out of the root, out of like off the charts, and then you're there being like, this is it, this is sick, I love this.
Yes.
I feel like that's the highlight. The worst part of the job is I work at a major hospital. Like, there's a lot of people who come in who have chosen not to pursue antenatal education, and they come in and they say, I'm just going to roll with it. And then things go wrong and you feel like you're participating in birth trauma, and the traumatization of this family is at the beginning of their child's life. I feel like that's the worst part, really. Sometimes things do go wrong, and like parents and their babies are separated, for example, or babies are born too early to even go to the NICU, and they like sadly only get a little bit of time with their families, and that's really heartbreaking. Even like when babies are born early and have to go to the NICU, I find that really heartbreaking. I am working on it, but the first time I saw an episiotomy, I went to the bathroom and I cried. And so that's also
Lexie.
something that's like heartbreaking. But I think now I'm a bit more seasoned, and I'm not as heartbroken by an episiotomy as I used to be. But I still wouldn't say I love them. Seeing people being traumatized by their experiences, having experiences with people where things don't go to plan, or when they come in or their baby's passed away and then they still have to give birth. I think that's one of the worst parts.
Yeah.
And that sums it up.
Yeah. Wow. I could not even imagine what that would be like. It's so, gosh, I can't think of the word, but whatever the word is for when something is like really, really far on one end of the spectrum and then the other thing's really far on the other side. Like what you described about birth going really well and those beautiful, incredible experiences of it going exactly how it's supposed to and exactly how the mum, hoped for and dreamed of. And that there's nothing like that moment. It's so true. I always tell people, like, it doesn't matter how many births I see or how many times I see a baby come into the world. Like, there's something just so miraculous and beautiful and precious about that moment. And I cry every time. Like, I don't think I'll ever be like desensitized or kind of get over that. But then, as you said, there's the other side of it where it's can be devastating sometimes and so heartbreaking.
I think the highs are incredibly high and the lows are incredibly low. It's kind of one or the other. Like you have your epic high and then you have your like medium high of like a birth that's gone well, but maybe not like absolutely incredible. And then you have the births that don't go well. And you have just the situations where you can just see birth trauma unfolding and you walk out of a birth experience as the care provider going like, whoa, how do I not carry this with me? Like, how do I release this and continue without bringing this into other people's experiences?
Yeah, and especially being a mom, it would be so hard to not carry that with you. Like, you're coming home to your little baby and thinking, gosh, what if something happened to you? Or like, it must be really, really hard.
Well, I think because I haven't gone back to work yet since Artie was born, I can't really speak to that. But I think when I was pregnant and like I was looking after people in the birth unit, for example, it was just a whole different ball game for me. Someone came in with decreased fetal movements or like absent fetal movements. I'd bring a friend in with me because I was so scared of being a pregnant midwife and finding a baby that's demised. It didn't happen, but it was just my biggest fear in pregnancy.
Oh my goodness. It makes total sense that was your biggest fear. That would be horrendous.
Just even the posture of being a pregnant midwife is like quite a fascinating posture to be in and like position to be in, especially when it's the first baby and you can't be like, oh, my body's done this before. I can have faith in my body. You just have to be like, I have faith in birth. I've seen it. I know it. It works.
Okay, so my next question is about if you like could give 3 pieces of advice to expecting mums, what would it be? And I feel like based on what you were saying before, I already have an idea of where you're going to go with this, considering that you just were like touching on, I guess, what the lack of education can do to a person's birth and the lack of kind of preparing really well for it and getting informed and well supported and whatever. But I won't put words in your mouth.
When I was like preparing for this, I was thinking about like, what are the 3 most pivotal things that every pregnant person should know? First one was research or just learn about what is important to you. So if it's important to you to have an epidural and an induction, go for it. If it's important for you to attempt to have an unmedicated vaginal birth, go for it. But I think research what's important to you in the case everything goes right, but also in the case that things don't go right. You're going to have this baby for the rest of your life until they become an adult and hopefully outlive you. So I think it's really important that you start off with doing the things that, or knowing about the things that are important to you. So I think that would be my first pearl. My second would be prepare for postpartum. Essentially, birth is only one day, and you hear so many people having done so much incredible preparation for birth, and then they've done no preparation for postpartum. They haven't thought about how to feed their baby or even how to nourish themselves. Make sure you have your team on board. So for me, that was like having I had acupuncture. I did something called acuenergetics. I had a women's health physio. I had contacts of a lactation consultant if I needed it. And then you've got your physical side of preparation as well for postpartum, which is make dump bags for your slow cooker, get your friends to organize a meal train for you, or like things so you can nourish yourself while you're in the postpartum haze, because you've got to look after yourself in order to look after your baby. And your partner can do a lot of the things, but they're also going to be in the sleep deprived haze too. So you've got to prepare for postpartum by just doing all the things that you can. And then the final thing, which is something that I found out about after my son was born, and I was like in a bit of a haze, and it was write down a list of the people who you can call to help. So like your friends who live close by, your friends who have kids around the same age that you can message in the middle of the night, your friends who don't work, and then like the professionals who can help you in case you need help. So have your GP's number if you need it. Like make sure you've got the contact details for like Australian Breastfeeding Association or a lactation counsellor or consultant, and just write down the people that you can call if you need, because there'll be a day where you're sick, your baby's fine, but you're just there and you're feeling awful and you need someone to come and help look after you so you can look after your baby, or even just come and look after your baby. But that's where you need the village.
Oh, the village is so important, hey? And you're so right about the lack of preparation for everything after the birth. Like, I think it's so common that this happens. I see it constantly. And it's so important to think about the days after. And I guess, like, I always wrestle with that saying about, oh, birth is only one day. It is one day, but it's also more than one day because it plays into the rest of the days. Like, if we think about trauma, for example, it could be, physical birth injuries. Like, for example, you touched on like episiotomies are quite rough, or even emotional trauma or whatever it is like that, then you carry that into your postpartum. So having a great birth is one day, yes, but it can either make or break a little bit like the process afterwards. But
Totally.
even separate to that, it is just so crucial. What you said about making a list, like having a meal train organized, doing those slow cooker meals that are prepared and ready to go. Like, it's so, so helpful to get that piece of the puzzle right as well. Oh, such good advice, Lexie. Can you tell me a bit about what your experience working with doulas at births has been like?
In terms of a good doula, I feel like a good doula is someone who has gotten to know the woman in her pregnancy and know her like hopes, wishes, and desires for her birth and postpartum. Understands the woman as a person and speaks her language, makes a big difference in terms of like the banter in the room. Like if there is banter, because it will just promote this woman feeling safer, and it makes a big difference. A good doula is someone you kind of have to peer pressure her to sit down. Like you have to be like she is working. She is like getting the birthing woman in like all the positions and like doing hip squeezes and doing all the things. And they're working, like you're all working in the same team. Like everyone has the same, we all are a job at the end of the day. The woman, her partner, the doula, the midwife, all of us just want to have a beautiful birth and a beautiful baby. And we all have the same goal. So being on the same team and working together is just, chef's kiss. That's the dream. A doula experience where it just kind of is just like a doula who's encouraging but sits down and like as a midwife you're there like teaching the partner how to do pressure points, for example, or like teaching the partner about hip squeezes and like really like facilitating that kind of physical support, the doula in that circumstance could be optimized to like help with the physical, like non-pharmaceutical kind of pain relief stuff.
Yeah. And I love what you said about the team. Like everyone's a different player on a team. And in the same way as you have, you know, different positions on, let's say, a footy field, like the midwife's position is the safety of the mother. And then you've got the doula who can come in and be, doing those hip squeezes so that the midwife can be checking baby's heart rate. Like the midwife doesn't need to be standing there for 12 hours doing hip squeezes or, it's so true. Like I think when everyone's in their lane and doing it together and
but just different parts of the machine, and we've got to work together in order to have this baby, and we've got to do it. Like we've all got to know our role and we've all got to stick to it. A bad experience I had with a doula is I don't know if it was this particular, like she was having a bad day or she'd had some bad experiences where I work, but she was just fighting us the entire time. Like she came in and she had her back up and I was like, can I get you a cup of tea? And she was like, that's all you think we do? I was like, oh my goodness, no. And just like everything was a fight. If I'd asked the woman something, if I would ask her for her consent to do, like I'm very consent heavy. So I'll be like, do I have your consent to do your blood pressure? Is it okay for me to touch your arm? And I'd be like, you don't, if you're consenting to me doing your blood pressure, just pop your arm out. You don't have to talk to me. And she would just fight everything. You don't need to do her blood pressure. I was like, oh, I really would like to do her blood pressure, like in this circumstance, just so I can have an overall idea of how she's going, because it's necessary at this point. Well, in the system that I work in, at least. This same doula just will voice her opinions on things without the woman talking. After birth situation, so we're preparing for the placenta, the birth of the placenta, and you ask the woman, what's your, like, I can see in your birth plan that this is your intention, just confirming. And the doula will say, why are you asking? It's in the birth plan. Like, oh, because past you and current you are not always the same person, and I've got to confirm before I do something or don't do something. And then the other experience is just where they're just sitting and they're not helping and they're on their phone. And I understand we've all got a life and we've all got things going on the outside, but if you're in a birth, be in a birth, go outside. If you've got to be on your phone, like, and like, if you need to nap, maybe go home for a nap and don't nap while the woman's in labor. Like, I don't know. That's just a bit off to me.
Are you kidding? Someone's napped?
Yeah.
Wow.
It was one time. It was, There's also been an experience where the woman had an epidural and I told her doula to nap. I was like, why don't you just have a lie down? So there's always like a time and place. And like the woman was having a sleep, her partner was having a sleep. And so I encouraged the doula to have a sleep in that circumstance. But there's also times where it's not appropriate.
Oh, absolutely. There's a time and a place.
For everything.
You don't need to be sitting on your phone while someone's, and especially when like you have been enlisted as a support person, like you're a paid resource that this family is relying on and counting on. And like you can't just take that lightly.
Yeah, I think often, like with this doula at least, I know that she's getting paid more than I am to be there, and I'm doing a lot more.
Yeah, that's so frustrating. That must be so tough for you as a midwife when it isn't that team dynamic and when you do have that unnecessary resistance. I know I always make such a big point of not coming across as like somebody who is taking control. Like it's not for me to take control at any time. It's like, this is about the mum, and is the mum happy for her blood pressure to be done? If she is, then great. Like, why does it need to be an issue if the mum's feeling okay about it or whatever? And especially, as you said, like if it was warranted, then it's warranted. Like it doesn't need to be a fight. And the cup of tea thing blows my mind. Like that's you trying to be I
I'm
guess
passing that an olive branch over here. I'm like, please be my friend.
totally. You're trying to pass an olive branch. That's exactly it. And then that resistance, like, gosh, that's just so unnecessary and so
Yeah.
mean. It's like quite mean. Oh, no.
It felt really mean. It felt like there was nothing that I could do to not be the midwife working in the system who I'm fighting against. And
Yeah.
it just puts you in a place where I feel like I'm a bit of a people pleaser in my personality that I'm working on, recovering. Um, but it feels like you're just there being like, oh my gosh, how do I not, like, how do I treat you? And how do I kind of assert our roles in this circumstance?
Yeah, and it's also really unfair on the mum because I feel like it then puts you and the other midwives in a position where you're tiptoeing around the doula, and that's going to take away from the care that the mother receives, which is really problematic. Like, if you are a doula and you want to be working in this space, then it's like, don't you decide to work in this space because you care about the mum and you care about supporting her as best you can? And like, I love the picture that you painted before of the good doula that you worked with, where it's like you can't convince her to sit down because she is on and she's working and she's helping and she is doing everything she can to keep that mum focused and confident and calm and comfortable and putting her into effective positions. Like, that's what it should be.
I think when we think of like the distinct roles in the room of like the role of the doula is like non-pharmaceutical pain relief, emotional support, um, and making the woman feel safe. And then the role of the midwife is the medical care of the woman and ensuring her and her baby's safety. I think there's just like a bit of a, I don't know what's going on or what this person's experience of midwives were, but it was not the that we have different roles that do cross
Yeah.
over, but not always.
Yeah. It's so true. So true. Okay, can you tell me what the biggest lesson that you've learnt so far is as a midwife?
I think just the number one thing is to trust birth. Like, birth tells you when it's going right, birth tells you when it's going wrong. Like, if you trust birth, being a midwife will be a lot easier. If you lean into your instincts, and like sometimes you'll be in a birth where everything's going right and you'll just be like, I've got the ick, what's going on? And you'll go out and you talk to the other midwives and the senior midwives and be like, hey, I've got the ick. Can you have a look at this circumstance for me? Or can you just double check this baby's position? Or there's something wrong. And off every single time I've had the ick in a birth, something has occurred, like a shoulder dystocia, a postpartum hemorrhage, or just something like my ick has been well founded. And so I refer to your ick as like your intuition is obviously your ick. So I think just the number one thing is trust birth.
I love that so much. And I feel like it always comes back to trusting your intuition and leaning into what your gut's telling you. I want to hear about a really funny or a really bizarre moment that you've experienced so far in your midwifery career.
There's been so many. I've had a surprise twins situation.
Wow, that's my dream. Every time I've had a baby, I have hoped that there's a second one. And everyone's like, and that doesn't happen. I'm like, yes, it does. I've heard stories. And so now you've experienced it. I have a first-hand person who can confirm
Well, I
this.
don't know if I would call it, and I've experienced it. This woman didn't know she was pregnant. And then she gave birth to one baby at home, came into the hospital, and I felt her tummy to see if she was having contractions. And I got kicked, and I was like, okay, there's two incidents. She didn't know she was pregnant. If she'd had an ultrasound, she would have known she was having twins. But she hadn't, and so she didn't know. And then she had quite premature twins because she didn't know she was pregnant. We were all bamboozled by it. We were like, wow, how do you not know? Like, that's incredible, but also, wow. Like, oh my God.
Especially if it's twins. Like, I think not knowing that you're pregnant is one thing, and that's like, wow, that's crazy. But then to be carrying twins and not know, like, that's incredible.
Yeah, incredible. And then my favorite story is I would have been pregnant and I was in charge in the birth unit. And we got this, I hadn't taken the pager because I was just doing my checks at the start of the shift, making sure all the things were where they needed to be. And so I was just doing my checks. And then the doctor came and grabbed me and was like, oh my gosh, Lexie, there's someone giving birth somewhere random in the hospital. And so I grabbed my pager and I was like, oh my gosh, okay. And so we ran around the entire hospital trying to find them. We called up the switch desk and they were like, okay, it's in this place near this color lift. So like, okay, we ran there, we got there, and this woman had gotten lost coming into the hospital. Yeah, she had her baby in the office next to the morgue.
Oh my gosh.
Literally. But she also didn't speak English, so there was like a language barrier, but it was just like she had a beautiful physiological birth with people who had never seen birth before because she was just in an office.
Wow.
And there was like people from emergency there because they got this page saying someone's giving birth in this corridor, and then the person who was coming into the hospital at the same time through this back entrance and found this woman like bearing down in the corridor was an ICU nurse, and she was there as well. And so all these people got to witness this beautiful physiological birth.
Wow.
The manager of the birth unit and the maternity ward, one had been out moving her car and the other had gotten the page and thought she better come along. Just in case in case I didn't get there in time. And so the managers actually were the accoucheurs or the receiving midwives, which was quite funny. The doctor who I was with was there, and then the NICU team was there as well, because like we didn't know anything about this woman.
I just can't even wrap my head around that. The poor thing, like walking around a hospital not knowing where to go when you are about to have a baby.
Literally.
That must have been the most shockingly stressful thing.
I know.
But she did it.
And then
she did it.
She did it. She didn't speak a word of English, and we like got the translator afterwards to be like, can we like explain what happened? Like, and she was like, oh, I'm happy. That was good. But
oh my goodness, I'm so glad that she felt good about it.
When she was like pushing, I was like, okay, if you don't need to be here, let's exit stage right. However, she was blocking the entrance, so everyone had to go to the end of the room.
Oh my goodness. Wow. It really sounds like something that came out of a movie. So cool. I love hearing it.
Yeah, it was just like it was a free birth in the hospital.
Totally. Who would have thought, hey, that was an option? I'm here for my hospital free birth.
I'm here for my in-hospital born before arrival.
Oh, so funny.
Absolutely.
Oh, Lexie, thank you so much for your time and for everything that you've shared. It was so good to get to hear from you.
My absolute pleasure.
So good. Thank you so much. Thanks for joining me today. Be sure to check back in for the next episode where we'll be hearing the birth story of a mum very close to my heart. Chat again soon.